All right. So as Cole said, I'm a digital marketing director at Geometric. So I handle a lot of different digital marketing for our clients, as well as trying to continue to evolve digital marketing at Geometric and find new problems to solve, new ways to use digital marketing to our advantage. Some of those that we're going to be going over here today.
Yep. And my name is Joe. I am a digital marketing strategist. I've been with Geonetric for almost 2 years now, and I've have about 7 years experience in the industry. So much like Tim, we work together on a lot of things, and just really try to, uh, be on the cutting edge of what's coming.
Awesome. So we have a pretty hefty agenda for this webinar. We're going to cover a lot of different topics. So some of them we might move a little quick through. So just a reminder, if you have questions at all during, it works out really well if you just get those in as you have them. That way we can kind of pause and address those within the right section and make sure that everything stays top of mind for everybody. But what we're going to go over is kind of why to even look into digital advertising, what it is, what's the point of it, how it helps, and then Joe's going to go over some pretty cool stuff around PPC SEO cannibalization and what that is and how to avoid it and why to avoid it, and then some kind of misconceptions around that to clear up. And then we're going to go through how we align these efforts, these initiatives with the patient journey. So we're going to walk through what the patient journey looks like. And then we're going to walk through which aspects of digital marketing align with which different segment of that journey. And then we're going to talk about something that I think is really cool, where we're tracking beyond the click. And it sounds a little bit mysterious right now, but that's a little intentional. But we're going to talk about some conversions in a really different way than a lot of people out there are talking about them. And then we can't really have a digital advertising webinar right now without touching on iOS 14. So we're going to talk about what that is, what the impact is, how we're addressing it, and kind of where we see things going in the future with that. And then the last thing we want to touch on is kind of over encompassing about all of this and why the approach has to be a little bit different for healthcare than it would be for other industries, what makes healthcare unique and how we approach healthcare as a different kind of beast than say retail or e-commerce or something like that. And then we should have some time at the end for questions. So if you think of questions for something that happened earlier and you don't really want to interrupt a different section and you feel like waiting, there will be some designated time at the end to address those. Otherwise, like I said, please get those in as you as you have them, and we don't have any problem kind of stopping and addressing those. So to start kind of diving in, why digital advertising? So kind of the broad spectrum of digital advertising encompasses paid search campaigns, paid social campaigns, display campaigns, digital audio campaigns, so your Spotify's, your Pandora's, things like that, creative development, and then landing page development. And there's a lot of different pieces that fit inside of each of those, but those are kind of the over-encompassing segment of digital advertising. And so one of the things that we wanted to kind of talk about where digital marketing is so important, or digital advertising, moreover, is so important, is within the data. So today, businesses have a lot more data and consumer signals than they've had before, which means that they can react or even proactively do a lot of different things and do so with data-driven decisions instead of just kind of making guesses than they used to be able to do. And so the example that we kind of have on the screen here is in 2020, we saw virtual care spike really dramatically once COVID kind of took over and became the focus of the country. And people, they still needed care, needed to access that care in different ways. And so virtual care kind of stepped in and filled that space. One of our clients, I think, put it in a really cool way. They had been talking about virtual care for years and kind of been putzing their way towards it, but COVID came around and forced innovation. And I think forced innovation is a really good theme for a lot of what we've been doing over the last year. But what's really fascinating about this is once we started to, flatten that curve initially, and we started to regain a little bit of confidence, and we thought we might have, gotten through the thick of it around May and June, we see the virtual care visits start to dwindle, and we see urgent care searches start to rise. And so what we've seen now, maybe later in the year, is a really reactionary approach towards how we're marketing, either on the paid side, on the SEO side, on the social side. So we reacted to virtual care because we kind of had to. There wasn't really much of a market in a lot of places for that initially. And so it was really reactive. But the people who pay attention to these trends, who look at this data, who analyze their markets, they had a really big advantage over everybody else because they saw the kind of turning of the tides here and were able to shift their focus into urgent care, knowing that that was on the way up and virtual care was on the way down. And so what you get there is you get, lower cost per clicks, for example, on the paid side because there's less competition. You get kind of your pick of the litter on placements as far as like social and display. So it's a really important message that digital advertising allows you to do this and allows you to react a lot quicker because it comes down to micro moments. So you want to have the right message at the right time in front of the right people. And so one of the ways that we can do that effectively is with paid advertising, because SEO, you have to build that up over time. And you can respond and react to market trends and market shifts, but it's still going to take a little bit of runway to effectively make that work. While paid advertising, you can do it in the moment. You can be right there. So understanding that micro moments are important. The other aspect of that is understanding the intent behind those micro moments. And so, for example, here, urgent care open near me is a pretty common search that all of you probably see at some point within Search Console or within your paid advertising. And then there's some different kind of messaging that doesn't just respond to, yeah, we're in urgent care and we're open. It responds to kind of the underlying intent, because there is a sense of urgency, pardon the pun, behind we want it open and near me right now. It kind of has that, like, I need to get there, it needs to be close, I don't have time to wait. And so skip the wait time, check it online, learn about our safety measures if you're still concerned about COVID. There's a lot of ways that you can not only tackle like the surface level of that, of the query, but the intent behind it. And why it's really important to do that is because across all the industries on the internet, ads that speak to the underlying needs or underlying intent draw 30% more clicks. So you're more likely to get that engagement if you're kind of getting in their head a little bit and understanding not only what they're searching, but why they're searching it. And when I talk about being able to do that really, really quickly with paid advertising and how SEO has some buildup, it's important to make sure those two things still align, because those strategies can't live in vacuums. And one of the reasons they can't live in vacuums is because of cannibalization, which Joe is going to talk to you about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tim. So I think that PPC cannibalization is a topic that is so critical, but very often overlooked. I think it is overlooked for a number of reasons. Sometimes those reasons are just how complex of a task it can be to really work through these. And I think that my first two bullets here are really a testament to that. So there's really three types of PPC cannibalization. There's geographic cannibalization. So that would be, if you can imagine, if you have two urgent care locations and you have a PPC campaign set up for each urgent care location. If there's any overlap in the geography of those two whatsoever, those two campaigns would in fact be competing against each other for some portion of the traffic. And so effectively you'd be having one campaign cannibalizing the other. So that one can get very complex if you start to look at just how many overlapping campaigns might be available, how local your campaigns are getting. It's not always easy to sift through that, but you can work through it by just paying very close attention to your geography, where you're targeting, using negative geography targeting to help limit that as much as possible. Keyword overlap is another example of that. That is, if you can imagine within a campaign, let's say you have a heart and vascular campaign. The ad groups within that heart and vascular campaign may have very similar search terms that overlap with each other some once you start looking at match type. So if you think about how PPC campaigns are set up, and there's a match type called broad match type, which really casts a very wide net around the keyword you select. It is possible that two ad groups within that same campaign might have some overlap there. And the issue with this particular form of cannibalization is more so making sure that the user's journey really lines up with their intent. So you don't want to be delivering an ad that's less than ideal when you already have an ad that's made up perfectly for what a potential patient's looking for. And so again, this gets very complex if you have a large number of ad groups, large number of keywords, but it can be managed really by using negative keywords and making sure that we're very careful with our targeting that way. But perhaps the outlier of the three here is PPC SEO cannibalization. This one I think is often overlooked because there's a certain amount of siloing that we do when we think about PPC and SEO. We don't often think about those two as being hand in hand as much as we should. We think about organic and paid as being really two separate things. We consider them separately. Sometimes different teams are working on them. It's just something that organizationally we just don't consider as being really as intertwined as they really are. And really what I mean when I talk about PPC SEO cannibalization is when you're advertising on keywords or search terms that you have already done that SEO work to perform well on. So you've optimized your content, you've done all the work, and organically you're really performing, you're top of Google search results, but you're also advertising on them. So it's a question of, does it make sense to pay for those clicks to your paid advertising when you've done all the work to basically get them for free? And so I think that as we look at that, its complexity really comes down to a couple of items. So as we move to the next slide here, what I think that what makes it so complex is really just that it's not as much of a one-size-fits-all solution as say geographic or keyword cannibalization, where those you really generally know where you want your ads targeted, where you'd like your keywords or search terms to be directed in terms of the actual ad copy and landing page. But with PPC SEO cannibalization, there are a lot of things you want to consider. So a classic thing that I always look for when I'm really digging into PPC SEO cannibalization is I look at branded terms. Oftentimes, branded terms, your organization's brand, tend to be some of the strongest SEO terms that you have. And so the question is, like I said, does it make sense to be advertising on those branded terms when those are some of your strongest organic terms? And the answer is sometimes. Sometimes it makes sense to pull away the advertising, but sometimes, for instance, if you have other organizations nearby who may be advertising against your brand, it may make sense to continue advertising on those branded keywords, even though you're already performing well organically, just so you can stay one step ahead of the competition that way. Additionally, if I go back to my example of, say, a heart and vascular campaign, if you have a strong heart and vascular SEO, where those organic results are driving people may not be where you want to send somebody who's looking for a specific test or procedure, who really just wants to sign up for that. And so oftentimes with that campaign, you might have a specific landing page with a form or what have you, so you can convert those searchers into patients. And it may make sense to drive them directly to that form as opposed to letting them discover it organically by navigating through the site. So there are a lot of different angles here, and that's why it's so tricky. You really have to look at it on a keyword by keyword basis, and really weigh the benefit of including those keywords within your advertising versus allowing the organic, your SEO work to really work for itself. And so that's why I think that one's so tricky. Is if there's no just turn them off, turn them on. No solution that you can just apply right away. as a sort of base level, you really have to dig into each campaign, each ad group, every single keyword, and really weigh their benefit versus their cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the cool thing about digital that I mentioned before is that it's so readily available. It's so immediate with digital advertising. So PPC, for example, which is where we see a lot of the SEO PPC cannibalization, obviously, um, it allows you to start a keyword right now and then stop it in an hour. And
Mm-hmm.
you might not get much data in that time, but you have that much control over it. So one of the cool things about that with cannibalization is you can dial down, your bids. You can add bid multipliers
Mm-hmm.
to branded keywords, and then in real time in Google Analytics, see kind of what your traffic's doing, and see if the organic is picking up the slack that the paid was bringing
Mm-hmm.
in, or if paid really was kind of hitting a different audience, because that's one of the complex things that's hard to
Right.
quantify is that the same search, the same landing page, the same SERP page might be a completely different audience on that same, every the other variable is the same and that's different. So like Joe said, there's no one size fits all, but it's definitely worth looking into
Mm-hmm.
and staying on top of. And so the next thing we wanted to talk about, which I kind of just mentioned that there can be different audiences that are landing on the same thing, is how to align with that patient journey, or how to align your paid advertising strategies with that patient journey. And so I think the retail journey is a good kind of example to show what the healthcare journey can be, because everybody is either consciously or subconsciously aware of what that retail journey looks like. You need a product, you research the best product of that type, you just decide on which brand, which vendor you want to buy that product from. You buy it, you use it, eventually you need a new one and you start that process over again. And healthcare isn't much different. So you have a need, whether that is care, treatment, whether that's a vaccination, you have a specific medical need. You do your research on which health system or which type of procedure or which type of treatment is right for you, and then you schedule, you select where you're going to have that done, schedule your appointment or walk in or whatever that looks like, receive that care, receive follow-up care, and then the next time you have another medical need, you start it over. So there's a lot of similarities between the way that you approach those journeys, and then that kind of simplicity of it allows you to focus a lot more on the nuance that maybe you don't have quite as much knowledge around, or quite as much data around. So Joe, do you want to cover the need step?
Yeah, absolutely. So the need part of this journey is really where you, as we say here, build awareness for your brand and help consumers identify their needs. So they've only just expressed that they have that need. They're not quite yet looking for a solution for it. So this is really where you're going to look at like display advertising, paid social advertising, digital audio advertising. It's a lot of brand awareness type of advertising channels. There are some pitfalls you're going to want to avoid, and that is, say, bad placements. You want to make sure that where these ads are appearing are going to be beneficial for you. Your campaign, may be too short. You might need to extend that, and then also you just need to be aware of the competition and where they're at too, and try your best to cover that.
So once you've kind of established your brand, you have your services, your treatments, your offerings kind of in the back of their head as they're deciding what it is they need. When the research starts to happen and they really start to dive in and kick the proverbial tires and compare you to your competition, this is where the paid search advertising, SEO, and content strategy really come into play. The paid search allows you, as we've mentioned a few times now, to understand those really specific or niche type of queries that apply to whatever the service or service line or content is, and then target those really specifically. And then your SEO, where it's more based on the more broader intent around that service line, can start to pick up the slack in other places and really start to kind of gain some momentum, because there is a definitive drop off in click-through rates organically as you go down the page. And so SEO is really important. It's not good enough anymore to just be on page one, because the click-through rate difference between the first to second, second to third spot are so dramatic that once you get down to 7, 8, 9, your click-through rates are really, really minimal. And when we take into consideration zero-click searches, which are continuing to rise year over year, for anybody not familiar, zero-click search is when somebody does a search and Google answers that query themselves. They don't need to click through to your website or anywhere else. They have the answer. The good thing is a lot of the times in healthcare, where those queries come in are either kind of provider or location based, and people are engaging with Google My Business, knowledge panels, things like that. So you're still getting the benefit of that traffic, but they're not visiting your website. So when you have a pool that kind of keeps shrinking year over year of people to actually get in front of and get to your website, you have to be much more intentional. You have to be much more strategic about that, which is why content is and will always be the king of SEO, because it's not enough to send somebody to your website if they're not going to find what they need once they get there. And so you have to understand your audiences. You have to understand their quirks and their personas and what they're looking for, where they're at in that funnel, and make sure that the first place they land on that website is giving them the information they expected to find. And so content strategy is just as, if not more important than it's ever been right now, especially as Google inches towards things like page diversity and things like that, which are going to limit those searches even further. It's the user intent is less of a give you a leg up on your competition and more of a mandatory aspect of digital marketing. And if you're not doing it, you might not show at all.
Okay, so you've done that work. You've reached the customer as they're researching. Now's the time where you want to make sure that you're helping them to schedule that point, to select you over the variety of options that they've come across during their research. There are a couple things that you need to take into consideration there as you're trying to usher them through to that final conversion point, and that is you really want to use A/B and multivariate testing. The reason you want to do that is it's fundamentally the best way to ascertain what works versus what doesn't. Whether that is say like landing page A/B testing, however you need to set that up, that's the best way to make sure that you're always optimizing for that patient path. Landing page optimizations fall under that too. That's again how you're testing your optimizations to determine whether they're working, whether you need to scale back, whether you need to continue forward, whether you need to change tack. Conversion tracking is going to be critical there too. Again, that's just really how you're going to measure the success of all the other testing that you're doing on your landing page and through A/B testing. Funnel analysis is going to be critical for you to really follow that that patient journey on site as they get closer to that conversion, that call to action point, just so you can know where people are coming in. Are they at that decision point? How can you, if they drop off, how can you bring them back in? And then retargeting is one of the ways that you can do that. If they don't select that to schedule right then and there, that retargeting can help you stay front of mind as they're still preparing to make that decision. So even if somebody drops off at this stage or at the research stage, you can keep bringing them back into this cycle with retargeting. And probably the biggest pitfall for this one is really just that set it and forget it mentality. We focus a lot, I think, on the research part of this journey, and sometimes don't focus enough on some of the other segments, which are just as critical. And so we just don't really consider this part as much. We do what we need to do, and then we forget about it and focus back on making sure we get people to that point. And so we don't do any testing. We don't really get very specific on what conversions we can use, want to track. We don't have enough conversions. We don't have enough data on what people are actually doing. So as a result, there's just little to no analysis that is happening there. And so I think that if I had one suggestion on this stage, it's really just making sure that we do keep that as top of mind as we do some of the other endeavors we have, because that testing, that retargeting, doing the analysis, doing the tracking is going to be how you're able to measure success of everything that you've done before and everything you're going to do after.
Absolutely. And then so once they've kind of selected you, they've scheduled that appointment, comes the care phase. And as a digital marketer, we kind of lose sight of that experience here. We plan on the kind of in-person, the doctors to do their jobs, the other staff to do their jobs, and to continue the experience that we've kind of set up online. But it's important to stay in the loop and stay kind of tapped into that, because it's part of that journey, and it's something to where you can make some data-driven decisions and optimizations and adaptations off of that information. So as we focus really, really heavily in the last couple of years or so on UX and CX and things like that, that overall experience of the website or other digital presences, it's important to understand that you also have a UX in person, and that UX extends beyond just the patient. One of the things that anecdotally I've seen quite a bit, having a wife that works in healthcare, is that the patient might receive amazing care and be very pleased with the care they received, but if their significant other felt like they weren't communicated with enough by the staff, or they felt like somebody at the front desk was rude, that person who received the care might not come back, not because they didn't receive quality care, but because the overall experience for their collective group wasn't up to what they were expecting or what their standards were. And so what you did on the website or what you do on the website might not have any impact on that, or might not be able to really account for that if you don't know what's happening. And so being able to see the bigger picture of this experience extends offline and then comes back online. That's why it's such an important piece. And so that ROI tracking, this is where that can really happen, and where I think a lot of people uh, don't necessarily either know that they can do it or don't want to put the effort into doing it, because things um, like pricing transparency is so difficult in healthcare. And no matter how much we try to work on it, it's just there's so many different variables that impact that bottom line dollar amount, to where it's tough to really put it in a spreadsheet and say, this is how much that costs, or this is how much profit we make on that thing. But the closest you can get to that, and actually attaching those numbers to your conversions, allows you to go all the way back into even the need state, and really dial in and say, we drove 100 appointments from these 3 different campaign initiatives, but we're doing it at a cost per acquisition here and a cost per acquisition there, and here's the actual dollars to dollars ROI we make off each conversion. And so we can see that maybe social marketing drives a lot of conversions, but they don't really offset the profit. And so we're not really making much revenue off social, whereas maybe our Spotify ads drive fewer conversions, but we do so for so cheap that our actual like net profit off of that initiative is super high. So maybe we should adjust our budget and shift some more money over there, where we're actually making a lot more money per conversion than we are elsewhere. And so you can't make those decisions, you can't have that information if you're not focusing on the offline, and understanding what you're really making off of these, and tying that patient all the way from here to here, because a lot of the times the only way that this is potentially being tied back is they ask a patient, how did you hear about us? And, oh, somewhere on the internet. Okay, put that in the internet column, and let's just kind of tally that up that way. But you don't know where on the internet, or if it was a paid campaign or SEO, or their friend just messaged them on Facebook about it, and that's what they consider the internet. So there's a lot of different variables that go out of focus if you're not really paying attention to this part. Which takes us into the kind of last segment before it cycles all over again, which is the follow-up care.
Yeah, so this is another portion where perhaps it gets forgotten about a little bit now that they've received the care. If essentially you have them, you want to keep them, and that's very important as they move back into the cycle and develop a new need and continue that research. So a few ways that you can stay top of mind and help them, from falling off of the radar is content marketing, again, email marketing, social media marketing, a lot of those things that as we go back into that need portion that need you to have sort of brand awareness. It's a very similar tactic here. It's just you always want to stay in front of them so that by the time that need comes around again, they know where to go, where to research, and then they can start the process all over again. You don't have to sort of start from scratch with that acquisition. You can build off of your earlier success and keep that continuing on.
All right, so all of that kind of summed up, this is what the journey ends up looking like from a digital marketing standpoint. So we have our top of the funnel brand awareness type of campaigns into our more specific query, user intent, audience focused campaigns and initiatives, into that user experience, understanding kind of the buying funnel, where they come in, where they go out, where they fall off, how do we make them not fall off there anymore. All of the kind of testing, tracking, conversion focused aspects into the offline UX and ROI, and then back into the how do we get them into our funnel again, whether it's for the same thing or a different thing. We want to kind of build that loyalty here. And one of the things, just kind of a last point on this, that I've heard a lot in different industries in digital marketing over the last 5-6 years, is that millennials don't really have the brand loyalty that maybe previous generations had, that they are willing to drop their bank, drop their friends, drop anybody if it's not suiting what they currently need. And it's true to an extent, but it's not true with healthcare, not in the way that we see it elsewhere. Millennials, and especially moving into the newer generations, they even require a little bit more of the hand holding from this regard, of that loyalty. And so the targeting of those audiences, the younger generations, is a little lackluster because we think that we're not really going to get like return on that investment. But it doesn't actually work out that way in the data. And so if your strategy hasn't included those generations, from marketing standpoint, I would definitely start having those internal conversations and get that folded in some way, because they're out there and they definitely will be loyal if you make them be. And so
Thanks,
one of the
Sam.
places,
Guys, before we jump into the next section, I wanted to make sure that we covered this question. Someone was asking about retargeting and how soon and for how long do you retarget?
yeah, so retargeting is always a fun conversation in healthcare because the general conception is that you can't do it, because of HIPAA. And while it's true that if I'm running a campaign for cancer care and I want to do retargeting, I can't run a cancer care retargeting campaign, because the general kind of idea behind it is if I were to engage with your ad on a public library computer, could the person who used that computer after me make some sort of assumption about my health, without me saying anything to them? And so if they were to get on there and start seeing ads about cancer care, they could guess that I have cancer, which is kind of a HIPAA violation. And so that's where it gets a little bit fuzzy. But the way that we run retargeting within healthcare is to run more of a digital brand awareness type of campaign, because when people are looking into something as serious as a medical condition, they're not going to forget they were looking into a medical condition. It's not like looking up a pair of shoes when I don't remember if I was looking at high tops or low tops. I'm looking into cancer care. I'm well aware of what I was looking at. And so when I just see a health system ad pop up, I'm already making that association. And so general retargeting campaigns work really well. The timing of those, I would just have them running consistently because this funnel is constantly going. And so there's always people coming in and out of it to where your retargeting is tackling somebody. And the consistency, that's another one where there is a lot of misconception about. And we're seeing that pop up a lot because of iOS 14 right now. That conversation is kind of resurfacing, to where people are seeing my ad 2-3 times. I don't want them to get ad fatigue or make them get annoyed or bored with it or whatever. But there is a really great article that I should find again that actually tested that, and they tested kind of conversion rates based on how many times they saw those ads. And with retargeting specifically, the highest conversion rates came at like the 5th or 6th time they saw the ad. It kind of wears them down a little bit, and they're like, okay, like I should check into this again. And it might even be kind of the subconscious billboard effect, to where you don't remember actually seeing that on a billboard, but you did. I always think of like Spirit Halloween. Like whenever Halloween comes around, I want to go to Spirit because I see their billboards everywhere, even if I don't acknowledge them. So I would always have them running, and I wouldn't get too concerned about people seeing them quite a bit, because they still engage a lot. And Google actually, Google specifically on like their display network or search network, they do a really good job of kind of pseudo IP tracking, to where if somebody sees an ad, I think it's 5 times in 1 week without engaging, it'll stop showing it to them by itself. So you don't have to really worry about that at all. I don't know if you want to add anything, Joe. I just kind of rambled the entire topic there.
No, I think you covered it. I agree with what you said. I think there's no wrong amount of time to be running a retargeting campaign. It's always going to work hand in hand with your other channels that are coming in. So it's best to just keep that going as much as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, hopefully that answered it. If not, if there's any sort of follow-up, feel free to pop back in. So one of the places where there's a lot of confusion or a lot of uncertainty are the actual conversion points on the website, or just within the patient journey in general. And we do a lot of audits of prospect or client ad campaigns that they're either running themselves or running with a vendor. And one of the things that I see a lot is we track kind of vanity metrics as conversions, which drives me a little bit crazy, because I like to associate conversions with things that make money. And so if I can't prove that something is making money, then I don't track it as a conversion. It doesn't mean I don't track it. I like to have every piece of data available, but phone calls, for example, I'll track those kind of as a micro conversion. I think they're important. I think they're valuable. But given the nature of healthcare and HIPAA and the fact that I'm not listening to those calls, I can't determine whether or not that actually generated revenue. And so I don't personally consider that to be a macro conversion. But it usually is even a little worse than that. And I see a lot of campaigns where they're tracking landing page views as conversions. And that doesn't do anything. You're not making money just the fact that they went to your page, unless you're also running ads on your page for other people. So conversions need to be revenue focused. And one of the most valuable conversions that you can have is somebody scheduled an appointment and then physically kept that appointment. So that's, they've received the care, they're getting a bill in the mail, they or their insurance is going to pay that bill. You're making money off of that conversion. And so that to me is kind of the tip top of conversions. And traditionally, it's been a little tough to actually track that all the way through, because a lot of the times where we schedule appointments online, it's done on a third-party app or a third-party platform. And so we have, really great solid tracking set up to take them from our ads onto our landing page, and we know they clicked through to that schedule online vendor, but we lose them there. They're no longer really our problem. We've done our part. They go, if they schedule or not, if they keep the appointment or not, that's not really, there's nothing we can do about that. And we didn't really like that as an answer. And so one of the ways that we typically set up our conversions or our ads, moreover, is using UTM parameters. So if there is anybody who's not familiar with UTM parameters, UTM stands for like urchin tracking, something super weird that doesn't make any sense to me. But basically what it is, if you see source, medium, campaign on a URL, those are UTM parameters. It's a way for you to attach data to a link to track later and be able to aggregate and tie together. So it's pretty common on paid advertising or just links online in general to have UTMs in the URL. And so the way it works usually is the UTM is on the URL when they enter the site. And then when they click somewhere else, if they click internally, the UTM disappears in the URL, but it stays on the back end. So it's still attached to that session. You could still see their subsequent pages or events or goals or activities tied to those UTMs, even if it's not in the URL. But once they click externally, the UTMs don't follow them. And the attribution data that you had before that was kind of attached to that UTM, attached to that session, is now gone. And so if you're running 10 different paid campaigns for urgent care, you have PPC, display, social, Spotify, you're on iHeartRadio, you have a newspaper ad, you have all these different initiatives that you're working really hard on to drive appointments for urgent care or primary care or whatever. And you're using UTM so you can keep really good track of that data within your website. And then they click through to schedule an appointment on a different website and the UTMs don't follow them. You might be able to say that we had 25 different people schedule an appointment this week, but you can't say, was it Spotify that did that? Was it PPC that did that? What really led to that? Because UTMs aren't there. So this is kind of an example of what that looks like. So this one, I wanted to use offline UTM because I think that's another place where people don't realize that they can use UTMs is in your offline marketing. So here we have our sources print. So in this example, we're doing a lot of different print advertising. This one specifically is a newspaper for urgent care, and more specifically, we're running 2 different newspapers, and this is the second one. So I have a lot of great data in here that I can track this user experience throughout my website and say that Local 2 newspaper drove this type of engagement on the website, and I know it's working or not working. So in the traditional flow, now when they click through to schedule that appointment, it's all gone. I no longer can tie it back to that campaign. I don't have any more information now on how successful this really was in the most valuable conversion we have. And so how we tackled this is we've done some advanced UTM tracking where we actually append those UTMs back onto that link dynamically. So if you come into our website, I'll just jump right to the actual example. So the same UTM we had, you come into the landing page with this UTM, and then you go to click through to that scheduling, that schedulenow.com in this example. Those UTMs now follow that user over. And so now when you get that data back at the end of the week or month or however cadence you get that from that vendor, when you get that back, you now have access to that data again. And you can say that Local 2 drove 10 conversions, Local 1 drove 5, Spotify drove 100. You have all the data to say which initiatives were successful, which initiatives aren't working. And so it seems super simple here. The execution is actually really complex, but we've been doing it for a number of clients, and being able to actually tie those conversions together, tie them back into our efforts, and make some really, really powerful driven decisions based upon that information is super helpful. So we no longer have to guess what's working. We don't have to just look at clicks or click-through rates. We have the actual, these people scheduled successful appointments. Next phase of this process is in-person tracking with cookies and mobile devices to say they actually followed through on that appointment and they showed up. But that one's a ways out. I have a lot of bureaucratic red tape to jump through to be able to do that. And so we're working on that, but the overarching theme being that your conversions have to be ROI focused, and they have to be tracked as deeply as you can track them. If you go and you look at your conversions, or you get a report from a vendor that's running your advertising, or somebody else in your team that's running your advertising, and they're showing things like page views or even like video visits or phone calls, or not video visits because that'd be like virtual care, video views on your site, like YouTube videos, things like that. Like that information is awesome to have, but where is the actual ROI? What am I getting out of this campaign? And if you can't answer those questions with that report, then you have to rethink that conversion strategy. Which conversion strategies are getting trickier on Facebook specifically, thanks in large part to Apple and their iOS 14 update. Joe, do you want to go over kind of the kind of theme of what we've seen with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who haven't heard this, it's been a pretty big talking point in digital marketing for the past month or so. And essentially, in the latest iOS 14 update, I believe it's 14.5. It started rolling out within the past few weeks. Users are now required to opt into being tracked for advertising purposes. So whereas prior to this, if you could opt out at all, it was a feature that you had to dig into the settings and manually disable yourself. Otherwise, by signing up for, say, an app or what have you, they'd be collecting your data standard. So now that's flipped. So now you'll get a pop-up and it'll ask you whether you want to share your data. In this, the big one in case it would be Facebook, and you can say yes or no. And as you might expect from that type of pop-up, a lot of people are saying no. It's just in general response to overall privacy concerns over the past few years. The movement for that has been growing, and this is sort of the culmination of it, at least coming out of Apple. So as a result of that, Apple devices will no longer share user or device level data with advertisers. This is the type of data that, again, Facebook really leaned into to really get very specific with their advertising profiles, and really attribution is the big thing here. How they're able to connect a user to an actual, say, a sale or conversion or what have you. And so Apple will still retain full control over all of that data. They just don't pass as much anymore. The data they will pass is minimal. So this is a very big shift. Reports are already coming out that there's anywhere between a 30 and 50% reduction in that attribution data. So you're seeing perhaps 30 to 50% fewer conversions coming out of Facebook. That really wouldn't be very surprising with this as it's starting to really reach everyone who has an Apple device.
So what we're kind of looking at with this is that we can no longer target Apple users directly using that third-party behavioral or demographic information. And when we think about how mobile has been growing over the last few years and what a large slice of that belongs to Apple, we basically can no longer target users based on the demographic or behavioral, because by doing so, we're acknowledging that we're going to miss such a large segment of that audience that doing it in general becomes a little more risky. But beyond the kind of targeting what data we're getting, it's caused a really big shift in the reporting that we get from Facebook. So obviously that same demographic kind of information is tough, but conversions is kind of what I wanted to touch on. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on iOS 14. We just put out a blog that's a little bit more comprehensive. We might do another kind of AMA thing. It's tough to put a lot of information out there because we're still in the early stages. Things might shift. Facebook is still trying to respond, and they might come up with some other things they can do. And so by the time that some of you might actually implement some of the things we're talking about here, it might be different. So I would definitely look into things as you're closer to really make decisions and make movement on these to make sure it's still the most accurate information. But conversion data has gotten really limited. You have a max of 8 conversion events per domain, which for some of those smaller retailers or e-commerce places, that might be okay. But as we were just talking about all those micro and macro conversions that exist in healthcare, 8 is nothing. We have 8 on the landing page, and now you can only have 8 per domain. And so it's forcing you to get a lot more creative, but also not creative with your conversions because they have to be able to fit your entire domain in them. So form tracking as one conversion, and then having to use UTMs or other sort of data to slice and dice those form fills after the fact, instead of saying, this specific form, that specific form, you have to be a lot more broad and then kind of compensate later. So you have a lot less conversion opportunities to track. And then the actual attribution behind those conversions is a lot more limited. The ROI attribution is limited. You don't have the click-through data. You don't have view-through data. It's basically all on that kind of like first last click attribution model now, which is very limiting as far as what we can track back to Apple users, which all in turn gives us a lot less control over how to target people, how to position our ads, what's working, what's not working, where people are, what they're doing. A lot of the things that kind of were unspoken affinity groups. I've talked about them a lot recently before the iOS 14 update, that people don't tap into affinity groups as often as they should, because when you look at them on the surface, they seem really silly. Like 30-year-old males who like houseplants, like doesn't seem like a really qualified audience. But when you have your other really good data and then you tap into those affinity groups on top of it, you have the opportunity to get in front of people who nobody else is getting in front of because they're ignoring them altogether. And so it's kind of like the icing, but now those are going away. And so like my secret weapon is null and void anymore. So what it comes down to as far as what we're looking at, what we're recommending, which again, if it's going to be a little while before you take action, look into it or let us know and we can fill you in on any updates we find, because things could shift pretty dramatically. But as of today, adapting your campaigns to those new standards is kind of first and foremost. If you are, as Joe mentioned before, the set it and forget it kind of people, that's not going to work now, at least not on Facebook. So make sure you're out there and you're adapting to what those new standards are. If you're tracking or if your campaigns are relying on that kind of offsite behavior, if you're relying on segmentation based on demographics, if you're relying on the information we've been talking about that's going away, if your targeting and placement strategy is based upon those, you're going to have to change them. Otherwise, you're going to see a really, really sharp decline in performance. And then the conversions, you're going to have to adjust to the new limit. And so a lot of times what we'll see is somebody will run a campaign for urgent care. They'll have all these really great conversions set up, and then they'll pause that conversion, or they'll pause the campaign, but they don't get rid of anything because they might run it later. And then they run a new campaign, and before you know it, in your account, you have hundreds of different conversion types. Some of them you haven't used in a year, but you might use them in the future, and you don't want to have to reset them up. It's unsure right now if those are going to count towards the 8. But if they are, then I don't know a single person who is already good to go and isn't going to have to make some massive adjustments, because there's a lot of conversions out there. And then the silver lining behind all of this, and I touch on it a little bit in the blog a little bit deeper, but it gives you an opportunity if you are one of the people who is going to do the research, do the work, tap into those other data streams that are available, figure out a new way to target. If you're one of those people who likes to nerd out over that stuff like we do, like Joe and I do a lot, you're going to be at a huge advantage here because other people aren't going to do that. Other people who do this set it and forget it are probably still going to forget it and not even reset it. And so you have this opportunity to target things in a new way with basically no competition. And if you do that, you're going to drive down your cost per clicks, your cost per acquisitions, you're going to increase your reach. You're going to see a lot of really great results, while everybody else is struggling to understand what they should even start with. And so make sure you're having those conversations with your teams internally, with the agencies you work with. Make sure everybody understands what's been changing, what will change, and that they're prepared for that. And then continue to do the research. There's some good sources out there that tend to stay on top of these trends. We'll try to be one of those sources as well, that will let you know, we now have access to Facebook click IDs. We thought they were going away, but now they're back. So understanding what those shifts are, because the dust hasn't settled yet. It looks like it's going to settle poorly, but it might not. And so it's important to kind of keep your thumb on the pulse there. Anything you wanted to add to that, Joe? I wanted to be cognizant of time and kind of push through that.
Nope. I think you covered it.
Awesome. Yeah, like I said, we've got that blog out there. And if if you guys want to have more in-depth, in the weeds conversations about this, we're definitely available to do that. Or if you have any more specific questions right now. But I don't want to put a whole lot of concrete stuff out there while we're still waiting for things to kind of pan out.
All right. Thanks, Tim and Joe. Oh, did you get, sorry.
Yeah.
Skipping ahead, getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. So just the last thing that makes healthcare unique in all of this is there's a lot of nuance and intent. And I'm just going to kind of rush through this because we're at break time right now. But there's a lot of nuance and intent. So for example, somebody searching for cardiology versus cardiologist. Somebody that doesn't understand healthcare might not see a difference in those. They might see it as just kind of a variation of the same word and run that in the same campaign with the same ads, with the same creative. But Google knows, and we know, and people that are looking for healthcare know that if I'm looking for cardiology, I'm looking for the service line. If I'm looking for cardiologist, I'm looking for an individual. I've already done the research on the service, and now I need somebody to perform the care or the treatment. And so there's a lot of nuances that if you don't understand healthcare on a really kind of granular level, you miss those things, and it can cost a lot of money. We've done some audits on really high spend campaigns, and there's a ton of ad waste in there, tens of thousands of dollars a month in ad waste because they don't have those nuances. They have a heart attack keyword running to a cardiology page instead of the ER. You're not going to go to a cardiologist with a heart attack, you're going to go to the ER. So understanding how the search engines interact with conditions and treatments and those nuances, understanding the patient journey, what that looks like, what research looks like, where people need to have the more micro moment transactions like urgent care versus the more knowledge panel type transactions like cardiology or cancer care, how to get by with HIPAA restrictions, how to understand how you can retarget effectively, how you can manage Facebook's health-related restrictions, how you can advertise for a site that has mention of pharmaceuticals, knowing that Google will likely disapprove your ads automatically based on the existence of that in your website. There's a ton of stuff involved with healthcare that just because somebody is well versed in digital marketing doesn't mean they're going to find success immediately within healthcare without taking the time to do that research and get that understanding. And I think the overarching theme of that is to keep that stuff in mind as you approach your different kind of strategic initiatives, but at the same time, make sure that as you work with your other vendors who maybe don't have healthcare specific approaches or don't have a background in healthcare, make sure that you guys are providing them with some of that information because they don't know what they don't know. And so as you guys work through running a cardiology campaign, let them know that, this sort of thing doesn't actually go to cardiology. Heart attacks don't actually go to cardiology. That looking for a specific provider doesn't go to a service line page, and understanding the intent. And you'll have a lot more success that way, being more involved in those conversations and letting them know, they have the digital marketing side down pat, you have the healthcare side down pat, and making sure you build that kind of synergistic bridge between the two. Anything you wanted to add there, Joe?
Again, I think you've got it.
Perfect. Yeah, I think we spent a little more time than we wanted to in a couple of sections, but that's okay because I think there's a lot of great stuff. I don't know. I see there's still quite a few people on. If there's any questions, I could probably still field a couple. Joe looks like he could field some.
But we had someone had asked about UTM codes and how to use those in print, and then connecting print URLs back to the whole UTM labyrinth maze sort of thing that you were talking about, Tim.
I was hoping somebody would ask this question. Offline UTMs are my favorite thing because nobody thinks of them initially, but if you use them, you have access to so much data So basically what you do is when you are doing any sort of marketing offline, you use a vanity URL, which is really easy to set up. So for example, if your primary care service line page lives at your URL /services/primary-care, you could set a vanity URL to your URL /primary care, and you could do some variations of that. You could do primary-care, primary care one word, you know, whatever it looks like. So you could have tons of different vanity URLs. And then that vanity URL, instead of just forwarding to /services/primary care, it forwards to that URL with your UTM parameters. And so you set up that forwarding right when you set up the vanity. And then governance becomes kind of the focus at that point, especially if you're running a ton of them. But it's usually as simple as we've created a UTM building spreadsheet. You plug in source, medium, campaign, term, it'll build the UTM for you, and you just copy and paste it wherever you want. And so what I would do is take that, which we can give that out to people too. I would take that, and then there's a column for notes, and I would just maybe put, you know, this is attached to this vanity URL. That way you can keep track. So down the road, if you want to use that vanity URL again, you can understand what the UTMs are, what it's attached to, where you could find that data. So it makes it pretty easy to stay on top of and keep organized. But yeah, you just set a vanity URL up and forward it to UTMs. And then from there, you just handle it like you would any other digital acquisition. But it's amazing. It's actually, I think people would be surprised how well their print advertising really works if they actually attach UTMs to it. I think a lot of people, even traditionalists, because I came from a place where I handled mostly traditional marketing, and I think even traditionalists are like we'll see that TV spot we just made, like what it kind of turns up. But if you attach the vanity into the URL, like again, I think people would be super surprised at how well that stuff works still.
All right, we got another question about iOS 14, and it gets a little specific. I'll ask it anyway, and if we need to defer, we need to defer. But someone asked, just to clarify, will Facebook retargeting no longer be possible for iOS 14 users? They say, wouldn't that be first or second party data? Sounds like the new iOS updates only limit third party data. Is that correct?
So it limits third-party cookies, which is a little bit different. So it kind of remains to be seen how retargeting will react, because it depends what you're retargeting. So if you're retargeting from like them visiting your website and then showing that on Facebook, then you're probably going to run into some issues. But if you're retargeting them clicking from Facebook and then retargeting back on Facebook, so like the origin point remains the same, it'll probably still work, because Apple, they're using what they call SDK ad network. It's this API framework they made back in 2018. They tried to get everybody to kind of jump on board with it. Nobody wanted to, and now they've kind of force migrated everybody to it. And so along with that, they have their own unique Apple ID. So just like the Facebook Click ID, the Google Click ID, like GAID, all the stuff that kind of gets attached to you as you bounce around the internet, they have their own. So if it's from an Apple user is on Facebook, clicks your ad to your website, leaves your website, and then is back on Facebook, you can retarget them there because that Apple ID never left that kind of network. But if you're trying to take them from Google to your website and then they're on Facebook and retarget them there, you might run into some issues because like that Apple ID might not have migrated. But that's one of those things where we don't really know yet exactly how it's going to interact. They haven't really outlined what they mean by third party, if they're just talking about cookies, if they're talking about everything related to third party data. Yeah, it's still up in the air a little bit.
All right, looks like that's all we have for questions. So just wanted to thank everybody else for sticking with us past the hour a little bit, and great questions as always, everybody. And a reminder that you can go to geonetric.com/webinars to get signed up for next month's webinar right away. And we will talk to you all then.